Hello and welcome to today's Up to Thrive, Manage Your Mind, Mindful Moment.
Welcome to Up to Thrive, your go-to podcast for women's wellness in midlife, designed to educate, support, and inspire you to live your very best life. And now your host, Dr. Corina Sims.
So this one may be a little emotional for me today, but as always, my intention is to positively impact you, the listener, in some way leave you with something of value. Sometimes that's food for thought, sometimes something that somehow exposes and challenges thinking patterns that aren't serving you, and sometimes my hope is to just leave you with a little more joy and sunshine in your day. I suppose today, my intention is to challenge judgments and encourage compassion and acceptance, and maybe a little of this is to do some processing myself. On a trip to Melbourne with my husband in the recent past, sometime in the last few years, we were having our usual De Grave Street breakfast, and I noticed that one of the little cafes there was offering a free meal to anyone who needed it. I think it was like a soup or something along those lines. And even now, the kindness and generosity really moves me. I've spoken a little about my brother on the podcast. I think the last time I mentioned him, I wasn't sure if he was still in the land of the living because I'd not heard from him for many months. He pops in and out of my life at random, and he's done that for many years. My little brother was born the day before my first birthday. I like to think of him as my very first birthday present. He's the most talented person I have ever met in my entire life. But we are very different humans. Most of my first memories of him were of him being punished for something that he did, which usually had something to do with not being able to sit still, not being able to not do things he was told not to do. And some of my earliest thoughts, I can remember thinking, why can't he just not do that, whatever that was getting him into trouble? I don't recall getting in trouble very often myself because I really didn't like it. And I learned very quickly, often, by watching him and then just not doing that. But not JR, he just never seemed to learn. And now, all these years later, looking back, I can clearly see a little boy who suffered pretty severely from ADHD. I've often wondered if his life trajectory would have been different if this had been properly diagnosed and managed, had he had parents who were capable of helping him develop strategies to manage the impulsivity and inattention, who could have nurtured his natural talents in art and music. But those were things that they weren't very good at either, and there is no upside in going down that line of thinking. It just causes pain, so I do avoid not doing that too much. Over the years, I have gone through all the various stages with my brother. I've taken him in when I still lived in America. I've dropped him to the rehab center. I've held his hand and cried with him as we buried both our mother and our father. I've picked him up off the street and got him a hotel room and some new clothes so he could shower and shave and be presentable as we buried our grandmother. Each and every time I went to America for the first 20 years I was living in Australia, he would somehow find his way to me. Sometimes carrying everything he owned in a shopping trolley, sometimes living in a car with a couple of other mates, often disheveled and in desperate need of a shower and some clean clothes. And as the years went on, he lost the ability to play his guitar or do any more of those amazing pen and ink drawings and tattoos. And he also lost more and more teeth. When I see men who fit this same description wandering the streets, or if I'm in the city on the sidewalk, I often think of my brother and I feel enormous compassion and silently send them peace and love. It wasn't always this way, though. I can remember taking a sociology course very early in my post-high school education, and I remember this idea being presented that often criminals were just repeating a cycle that they were born into. essentially that they couldn't help themselves. And I remember getting really angry and arguing that that was a load of crap. Look at me. I wasn't a criminal. Of course, I was very young, without the foresight of life experience. I didn't see then what I see now, that unfortunately, this is often the fate of those born into certain situations. It took me a long time to appreciate that my story, making it out of that cycle, is sadly an exception rather than the rule. I don't offer it as an excuse for people like my brother who have made similar choices, but rather as an understanding. I can grant compassion, but not permission. There is still lawful and unlawful, kind and unkind. I have done my time with codependence. It took me some years to learn, but I have learned that healthy relationships are two-sided, with both people nurturing the relationship and contributing equally both love and support to each other. Codependent relationships are one-sided, with one person being the giver and the other person the taker. The giver supports, perpetuates, or enables the taker's irresponsible or destructive behavior. Calling in sick or fixing a situation for a spouse with a drinking problem, or repeatedly bailing out an adult child with a substance use issue are a couple of examples. I will say that my brother has never really asked me for too much. Even in those earlier days, it was me trying to help him and to try to make him live the life I thought he should be living. That was probably more about me than about him. It was very painful for me to see him living a life that seemed so painful to me. He wasn't really asking for help, though. That was just the life he was living. And he has never really asked me for money or to buy him anything. He just wants to hear how my life is and what the kids are doing and to tell me how much he loves me. And when he has found me on my visits to America, I always take him out for a meal and just enjoy his company. And I see the way that people treat him. I see my brother. They see a homeless man. He's told me many stories of emergency room visits from lots of various things, either drug or alcohol related. And often he tells me he's treated poorly. And I know, I've worked in busy emergency departments where people just like him are treated as less than menaces of society. And early in my career, I'm ashamed to say I probably wasn't too far off thinking thoughts of not wanting to waste resources on people like that. But for those times when he's treated with compassion, it breaks my heart with gratitude. I am just so thankful that someone has seen the human in him. The man who is afraid of death, yet seems to be looking for it every day of his life. Over the last few weeks, we've had a couple of video calls which have been beautiful, but excruciatingly painful. Our discussions have very much been around end-of-life topics because he's quite unwell, and I fear probably doesn't have many more days left in him. He has tried to kick the drugs and the alcohol on many occasions, and obviously he's not been successful. This is his journey. I don't want the life he's living, but I don't have to live it. Those are the choices that he has made along the way. The cards were very much stacked against him. His life experience from infancy has not been overly helpful or pleasant. I know. I was there. I watched it. I clearly see exactly why he is the way that he is. And I do feel enormous grief and sadness for the life that he could have lived if things had been different. But after many years of pain, I also feel acceptance. I can't fix it, but I can love him without judgment, just for being my brother. I hope you've enjoyed this Manage Your Mind mindful moment. And if you have, and you can think of someone else who might enjoy it, please pass it on. And don't forget to rate and review the podcast to make it more visible to those who might get something out of it too. Have a great week, everyone. And until then, I hope you opt to thrive.
The Opt to Thrive podcast is designed for information purposes only and is not engaged in the giving of medical advice. The information provided on the podcast should not be used for diagnosing or treating a health problem or disease. In no way should the information provided by Opt to Thrive be considered medical advice, and at all times the advice of a medical professional should supersede recommendations from Opt to Thrive. If you have or suspect you may have a health problem, you should consult your healthcare provider. The views expressed in this podcast are purely that of Dr. Sims and do not in any way reflect those of the institutions she contracts with medical services to.
Thank you for listening to Opt to Thrive. If you've enjoyed listening, please rate and share the podcast. You can visit our website at opttothrive.com and leave a comment for any subjects you would like to hear more about.